How far will you go for your dog? I was throwing tennis balls for Luna, my 2-year-old husky, at Riverside Park when she suddenly collapsed. One second she was running full speed, the next she was convulsing on the ground with foam coming out of her mouth. I screamed for help while people just stood there staring. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911 as Luna's eyes rolled back in her head. A woman jogging past yelled that her dog had the same thing happen last week and to get Luna to the emergency vet immediately. I scooped up all 55 pounds of her seizing body and ran to my car, breaking every traffic law getting to the animal hospital. The vet took one look and said it was poisoning. Probably rat poison based on the symptoms. They rushed her into surgery while I stood in the waiting room trying not to throw up. 3 hours later, Dr. Patel came out looking exhausted and said Luna would survive, but it was close. The bill was $8,300 for the emergency surgery, blood transfusions, and overnight monitoring. I put it on 3 different credit cards. Dr. Patel said this was the 6th dog this month with the same poisoning, all from the same park. She'd reported it to animal control and the police, but nothing had been done. The other 5 dogs hadn't made it. I felt sick thinking about Luna playing in that park every morning for the past year, how many times she could have eaten something terrible. When I asked if anyone knew how the poison was getting into the park, Dr. Patel said the theory was someone was deliberately leaving poisoned meat around, but there was no proof, just dead and dying dogs. I asked for the names of the other families who'd lost their pets. She couldn't give me that information due to privacy rules, but she said I wasn't alone in this nightmare. That should have been comforting, but instead made me furious. 6 families destroyed by some psychopath, and nobody was doing anything to stop it. I left the clinic with Luna barely conscious in the backseat and a payment plan that would take me 2 years to pay off. The next morning, I called the police non-emergency line to report what happened. The officer who answered sounded bored and said they were aware of the situation but couldn't investigate without evidence of criminal activity. I pointed out that poisoning dogs was criminal activity, and he said they needed proof of who was doing it, not just that it was happening. He suggested I contact animal control instead. Animal control told me they couldn't do anything without catching someone in the act. They'd increased patrols in the park but hadn't seen anything suspicious. The woman I spoke with, Diane, sounded genuinely sympathetic, but explained their department was understaffed and underfunded. She couldn't station someone at the park 24/7 waiting for a poisoner to show up. I asked about security cameras, and she said the park didn't have any. Budget cuts had eliminated most public safety measures over the past few years. I hung up feeling completely helpless and furious that Luna had almost died, and nobody seemed to care enough to actually do something. I spent that afternoon on social media looking for other victims. I found a Facebook group called Riverside Park Dog Owners, with over 300 members. I posted about Luna and within an hour had responses from 4 families whose dogs had died from poisoning in the past 6 weeks. Their stories were identical to mine. Dogs suddenly collapsing during normal walks, emergency vet visits, massive bills, and deaths. One woman named Clarissa had lost her golden retriever Bailey just 3 days ago. She'd spent $12,000 trying to save him, but he'd died anyway. Her post included photos of Bailey as a puppy and the heartbroken face of her 6-year-old daughter at his grave. Another man, Dennis, had lost 2 dogs in the same incident when both ate poisoned meat during an evening walk. He'd filed police reports, contacted the mayor's office, and even hired a lawyer, but nothing had come of it. The legal system treated pet deaths as property damage, he explained, with maximum damages capped at the dog's purchase price. His rescue mutts were worth nothing legally. I created a group chat with the 4 families and we shared information. Clarissa mentioned she'd started documenting the exact locations where she'd seen suspicious meat pieces before Bailey died. Dennis had been keeping a log of when poisonings occurred, noting they seemed to cluster around early morning and evening hours. A woman named Yolanda, whose corgi had survived, said she'd noticed an older man in the park several mornings who seemed to be walking without a dog, which was unusual for that area. Most people at the park were there specifically with their pets. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but looking back it seemed odd. The 4th person, Trevor, said his German Shepherd had gotten sick near the north entrance by the playground. All the incidents were concentrated in specific areas of the large park. We marked everything on a shared map, and a pattern emerged. The poisoned bait was being placed along 3 main dog walking paths, always near bushes or trees where it wouldn't be immediately visible. This wasn't random. Someone was specifically targeting these locations. That night, I couldn't sleep, lying next to Luna's bed on the floor like I used to when she was a puppy. She was still weak and kept whimpering in her sleep. Every time she made a sound, my heart would race, thinking something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., I made a decision. If the police weren't going to investigate, I would. I had 2 weeks of vacation time saved up that I'd been planning to use for a beach trip. Instead, I'd use them to catch whoever was doing this. I started researching wildlife cameras and hidden surveillance equipment. By sunrise, I'd ordered 4 weatherproof trail cameras that could record in night vision and send alerts to my phone when they detected motion. They'd arrive in 2 days. In the meantime, I drove to Riverside Park as soon as it was light enough and walked the paths where poisonings had occurred. I was looking for anything suspicious, any clues about who might be doing this. Near the north entrance, I found a piece of meat partially hidden under a bush. My stomach turned over. I carefully photographed it from multiple angles without touching it, then called Diane at Animal Control. Diane arrived within an hour with a hazmat bag and gloves. She collected the meat sample and said she'd send it to the lab for analysis, but warned me it would take weeks to get results back. While we were standing there, an older man walked past us on the path. He wasn't with a dog and didn't have the typical dog walker gear like waist bags or a leash. He gave us a strange look, almost irritated, before continuing past. Something about his expression made my skin crawl. After he was out of sight, I asked Diane if she recognized him, and she said she'd never seen him before. She made a note of the time and description, then told me to be careful. If someone was deliberately poisoning dogs, confronting them could be dangerous. I promised I wouldn't do anything stupid, but internally I was already planning how to follow this man if I saw him again. The cameras arrived Wednesday morning, and I spent the afternoon installing them in strategic locations around the park. I positioned them to cover the 3 main areas where poisonings had occurred, hiding them in trees and bushes where they wouldn't be obvious. The setup allowed me to monitor all 4 camera feeds from my phone simultaneously. For the next 5 days, I watched hours of footage of people walking their dogs, joggers, and families. Nothing suspicious. I was starting to wonder if the poisoner had stopped or somehow knew about the cameras. Then on Monday morning at 6:15 a.m., camera 3 near the playground captured something that made my blood run cold. The same older man I'd seen last week was walking slowly along the path, stopping every few yards to toss something into the bushes. The camera quality wasn't great in the early light, but I could clearly see him pulling items from a plastic bag and distributing them along the route. I immediately called the police and reported what I was seeing. The dispatcher said she'd send an officer, but it would be at least 20 minutes. That was too long. This man could distribute poison to a dozen locations in that time. I grabbed Luna's leash and headed to the park even though Luna wasn't coming with me. I couldn't risk her being there. When I arrived, I spotted him near the south entrance, still carrying the plastic bag and occasionally bending down near the bushes. I started recording on my phone as I approached, keeping a safe distance while capturing his face and actions. He noticed me filming and his expression turned hostile. He shouted that I needed to mind my own business and stop harassing him. I asked calmly what he was putting in the bushes, and he said it was none of my concern. Then he said something that confirmed everything. These damn dogs shouldn't be running loose anyway, terrorizing people and making noise. Someone needs to teach their owners a lesson. I kept filming as he became more agitated, yelling that dogs were ruining the neighborhood, and he had every right to protect himself from aggressive animals. A police car finally pulled into the parking lot, and 2 officers approached. I explained what I'd witnessed on my camera and showed them the footage on my phone. One officer detained the man while the other searched his bag. Inside were chunks of raw meat mixed with bright blue pellets that looked like rat poison. The officer's expression hardened as he pulled on gloves and secured the bag as evidence. The man, who gave his name as Lawrence Pritchard, claimed he was just leaving food for stray cats. The officers arrested Lawrence on suspicion of animal cruelty and took him away in the patrol car. One officer stayed behind to take my statement and get copies of my camera footage. She explained that with video evidence of him distributing the poison, plus the physical evidence of the poisoned meat, they had a strong case. She asked if I knew about other victims, and I gave her contact information for Clarissa, Dennis, Yolanda, and Trevor. She said the detective assigned to the case would reach out to everyone. I felt simultaneously relieved and enraged. This man had killed 5 dogs and nearly killed Luna, all because he didn't like the sound of barking. Over the next week, the story exploded in local media. Someone had leaked Lawrence's arrest to reporters, and suddenly my neighborhood was the center of a regional news story about the dog poisoner. Camera crews showed up at Riverside Park. Clarissa gave a tearful interview holding Bailey's favorite toy. Dennis displayed photos of his 2 deceased dogs and explained the financial and emotional devastation. The public response was immediate and fierce. Lawrence became the most hated man in the county overnight. Detective Grace Moreno contacted me and the other families to build the case. She was thorough and genuinely angry about what had happened. She explained that Oregon law treated animal cruelty as a misdemeanor unless you could prove extraordinary circumstances. But with 5 dead dogs and multiple counts of poisoning, plus the premeditated nature of the crime, she was working with the DA to file felony charges. The more families who came forward, the stronger the case. Within days, 3 more families who'd lost dogs months earlier contacted Detective Moreno after seeing the news coverage. They hadn't realized their dogs' sudden deaths were from poisoning because the symptoms had been attributed to other causes. One family had spent thousands on cancer treatment for their Labrador, only for the dog to die anyway. The vet confirmed in retrospect the symptoms matched rat poison. Lawrence had been doing this for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The death toll was now at least 11 dogs that we knew about. Detective Moreno said there were probably more that were never reported or misdiagnosed. I went back through my camera footage from all 4 cameras and compiled every instance of Lawrence appearing in the park. There were 23 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks alone where he'd been distributing the poisoned meat. I created a detailed timeline with timestamps and locations. Detective Moreno was impressed and said this would be crucial evidence showing premeditation and pattern. She also asked if I'd be willing to testify at trial, and I said absolutely. Meanwhile, Luna was slowly recovering. She still got tired easily, and the vet said there might be permanent kidney damage, but she was alive. Every time I looked at her, I thought about Bailey and Dennis's 2 dogs and the others who hadn't survived. The guilt was crushing. If I'd installed cameras earlier, could I have stopped Lawrence before more dogs died? Dr. Patel told me not to think that way, that I'd done more than anyone to bring him to justice. But the what-ifs kept me up at night. I started having nightmares about finding Luna dead in the park, about not getting to the emergency vet in time, about all the ways I could have lost her. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks after Lawrence's arrest. The DA filed charges including 11 counts of aggravated animal cruelty, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. If convicted on all counts, Lawrence could face up to 5 years in prison and $125,000 in fines. His lawyer immediately tried to get the charges reduced, arguing his client was a confused elderly man who'd been trying to deal with a rat problem in the park. Detective Moreno shut that down by presenting evidence that Lawrence had researched dog poisoning online, specifically looking up which substances would be lethal and how to disguise them in meat. His browser history showed dozens of searches like how much rat poison kills a dog and symptoms of dog poisoning. This wasn't confused elderly behavior. This was calculated murder. At the hearing, Lawrence sat stone-faced while the prosecutor presented evidence. Clarissa broke down on the witness stand describing Bailey's final moments. The judge looked visibly disturbed by the photos of poisoned meat and Lawrence's search history. Bail was set at $50,000, which Lawrence paid immediately, to the shock of everyone in the courtroom. He was released the same day with an ankle monitor and strict orders not to go near Riverside Park or any public spaces where dogs might be present. The media coverage intensified after the hearing. National news outlets picked up the story. Animal rights organizations got involved. PETA issued a statement demanding maximum sentencing. The prosecutor's office was flooded with letters and calls from across the country. People were sending money to help with Luna's medical bills and the legal fees for families who wanted to sue Lawrence civilly. A GoFundMe I hadn't even created was set up by someone from the Facebook group and raised $45,000 in 3 days. Clarissa, Dennis, Yolanda, Trevor, and the 3 newer families split the money to cover their vet bills and memorial costs. The outpouring of support was overwhelming and made me cry more than once. Meanwhile, I kept the cameras running in the park. I wasn't sure if Lawrence might try to return despite the court order, or if there might be copycat poisoners. The footage showed park usage had dropped dramatically. People were terrified to bring their dogs there now, even though we'd caught the poisoner. The local news ran segments on how to spot poisoned bait and what symptoms to watch for. Detective Moreno called me 6 weeks after Lawrence's arrest with unexpected news. During the investigation, they'd searched Lawrence's house and found journals documenting every dog he'd poisoned going back 2 years. He'd kept meticulous records including dates, locations, dog breeds, and whether the poisoning was successful, in his words. The actual death toll was 31 dogs, not 11. He'd been doing this for 2 years, evolving his methods to avoid detection. Earlier poisonings had been in different parks across 3 cities. He'd moved around to avoid suspicion. The journals also revealed his motivation, which was somehow even more disturbing than I'd imagined. Lawrence had lost his job as an accountant 5 years ago and blamed a coworker who had brought her dog to the office. Lawrence was allergic to dogs and had complained repeatedly. Eventually, he was fired for creating a hostile work environment with his complaints. In his mind, all dogs and their owners were responsible for ruining his life. The journals were filled with vitriolic rants about entitled dog owners and dangerous animals. Detective Moreno said the journals would be powerful evidence of premeditation and motive. The DA amended the charges to include 31 counts of animal cruelty, 1 for each documented poisoning. The trial was scheduled for 4 months out. In the meantime, Lawrence's face was plastered all over local media. His adult children gave interviews saying they'd cut off contact with him years ago because of his increasingly extreme behavior and paranoia. One daughter, Gretchen, said her father had always been controlling and angry, but after losing his job, he'd become obsessed with perceived slights and vendettas. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years and wasn't surprised he'd done something like this. His ex-wife, who'd divorced him a decade ago, said he'd been emotionally abusive and vindictive throughout their marriage. She described incidents of him poisoning neighborhood cats that she'd attributed to local wildlife at the time. Looking back, she realized he'd been doing this kind of thing for decades. The portrait of Lawrence that emerged was of a man who'd spent his entire adult life blaming others for his failures and acting out in increasingly cruel ways. Dogs had just been his latest target. Every new revelation made me angrier. This wasn't a confused old man. This was a calculated predator who'd enjoyed killing animals for years. I attended every court date and pre-trial hearing. Clarissa, Dennis, and others from the victim families came too. We formed a tight group, bonded by shared trauma and determination to see justice done. The prosecutor, Vanessa Chang, kept us updated on legal strategy. She was building an airtight case and felt confident about conviction on most counts. Lawrence's defense attorney tried repeatedly to negotiate a plea deal, but Vanessa refused anything less than significant prison time. She wasn't going to let him plead down to probation for killing 31 dogs. The trial began on a cold morning in January, 8 months after Luna's poisoning. The courtroom was packed with victim families, media, and concerned community members. I testified on the first day, walking through finding Luna collapsed, the emergency vet visit, installing cameras, and capturing Lawrence on video distributing poison. The defense attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination, suggesting I'd installed cameras illegally or fabricated evidence, but I stayed calm and stuck to facts. Vanessa presented my camera footage, which was damning. You could clearly see Lawrence's face and actions. There was no ambiguity. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa called victim after victim to testify. Clarissa described Bailey's death in heartbreaking detail. Dennis explained the financial devastation of losing 2 dogs. Dr. Patel testified about the specific type of poison used and its effects. Detective Moreno presented Lawrence's journals, reading selected passages that made several jurors visibly upset. The forensic accountant testified about Lawrence's financial situation, showing he'd spent over $2,000 on rat poison in 2 years, far more than any residential rat problem would require. He'd been buying it in bulk and distributing it specifically to kill dogs. The defense's case was weak. They tried to paint Lawrence as mentally ill, calling a psychiatrist who testified about his depression and paranoia. But Vanessa destroyed that argument by pointing out that Lawrence had deliberately hidden his activities, researched methods online, and kept detailed records of his successes. Those weren't the actions of someone too mentally ill to understand right from wrong. Those were the actions of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and wanted to get away with it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Jury deliberation took 6 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all 31 counts of aggravated animal cruelty, plus the reckless endangerment and criminal mischief charges, the courtroom erupted in applause. The judge had to call for order. Lawrence showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead. Sentencing was set for 4 weeks later. Vanessa told us the conviction was a huge win, but sentencing was less predictable. Oregon law had maximum sentences for animal cruelty, but judges had discretion on whether to run sentences concurrently or consecutively. She'd be arguing for maximum consecutive sentences, but the judge might not agree. We waited anxiously for those 4 weeks. I tried to get back to normal life, returning to work and resuming Luna's daily walks. But the park felt different now. Even though Lawrence was in custody awaiting sentencing, the memory of what happened there lingered. Other dog owners were slowly returning, but everyone was hypervigilant, watching the ground for anything suspicious, keeping dogs on short leashes. The innocence of the park as a happy place was gone, replaced by wariness and fear. Sentencing day arrived, and the courtroom was even more packed than during trial. The judge allowed victim impact statements before sentencing. I went first, describing how Luna's poisoning had affected both of us, the ongoing medical issues she faced, the financial burden, and the psychological trauma. Clarissa spoke about Bailey and how her daughter still cried for him every night. Dennis described the hole left by losing both dogs at once. One by one, 17 families gave statements. Some were composed, others broke down crying. By the time everyone had spoken, 3 hours had passed and several jurors in the gallery were in tears. The judge looked grim as she listened to each story. When it was time for sentencing, she addressed Lawrence directly. She said in 30 years on the bench, she'd never seen such calculated cruelty toward innocent animals. She described his journals as the work of someone who took pleasure in causing suffering. She said while Oregon law limited her options, she would impose the maximum sentence available. For 31 counts of aggravated animal cruelty, she sentenced Lawrence to 5 years in prison on each count, to run consecutively. That meant 155 years total, though realistically he'd likely serve far less due to parole eligibility and his age. She also ordered him to pay $127,000 in restitution to be divided among the victim families for vet bills, cremation costs, and emotional distress, plus court costs and fees. The total judgment was over $180,000. Lawrence would likely die in prison and be financially destroyed even if he somehow got out. When the judge finished, the courtroom erupted in applause again. This time she let it continue for a moment before calling for order. As Lawrence was led away in handcuffs, he turned and looked directly at me. His expression was pure hatred. No remorse, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just rage that he'd been caught and held accountable. That look reminded me why all of this had been necessary. He would have kept killing dogs indefinitely if someone hadn't stopped him. After sentencing, our victim group held a small celebration at a local restaurant. It felt weird to celebrate anything related to such tragedy, but we needed closure and recognition of what we'd accomplished. We'd gone from isolated victims to an organized force that secured one of the longest animal cruelty sentences in state history. Vanessa joined us and said this case would set precedent for future animal cruelty prosecutions statewide. Other DAs were already citing it in their cases. Life slowly returned to a new normal over the following months. Luna fully recovered and even started playing with other dogs at the park again. The city installed security cameras throughout Riverside Park and increased animal control patrols. They also put up warning signs about being vigilant for poisoned bait and posted educational materials about what to look for. The Facebook group evolved into a neighborhood watch specifically for dog safety. Yolanda organized weekly meetups where members would walk the park together, document any suspicious activity, and maintain the surveillance network. We'd created something positive from tragedy. 6 months after sentencing, I got a letter from Lawrence in prison. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages of self-pitying rambling about how he was the real victim, how dog owners were entitled and negligent, how he'd been unfairly targeted by the media and legal system. There was no apology, no acceptance of responsibility, just more blame and excuses. I shared the letter with Detective Moreno, who said it was consistent with Lawrence's personality profile. He would likely never accept that what he did was wrong. A year after Luna's poisoning, on the anniversary of that terrible day, our victim group held a memorial at Riverside Park. We planted 31 trees, one for each dog Lawrence had killed, with plaques bearing their names. The city approved it as part of a park beautification project. Clarissa's daughter helped plant Bailey's tree, a young oak that would grow for decades. Dennis planted trees for his 2 dogs side by side. When it was my turn, I planted Luna's tree even though she'd survived. She deserved to be remembered as a victim too, and this living memorial would outlast all of us. Local news covered the memorial, and the outpouring of community support was overwhelming. People we'd never met showed up to help plant trees and pay respects. The park that had been a place of terror slowly transformed into a place of healing and remembrance. 2 years later, Lawrence was denied parole, as we'd expected. He'd accumulated disciplinary violations in prison for hostile behavior toward guards and other inmates. His earliest possible release date was pushed back 5 years. By then, he'd be 73 years old. His adult children had completely cut off contact and refused to visit. His ex-wife had successfully sued him in civil court for emotional distress and won a judgment he'd never be able to pay. Luna is 4 years old now, healthy and happy. The emergency vet bills are finally paid off. We still walk at Riverside Park every morning, though I'm always vigilant. Some trauma never completely fades. But the park is different now, better in some ways. There's a real community here, people who look out for each other and each other's pets. We've prevented 2 attempted poisonings since Lawrence's conviction, both by disturbed individuals who'd heard about his case and apparently thought it was a good idea. Both were caught quickly thanks to our surveillance network and are now facing charges. The system works better now because we made it work. Sometimes I think about that moment when Luna collapsed, how my world ended in an instant. I think about the other families who'd gone through the same thing with nobody helping them. I think about how close we came to Lawrence getting away with it forever. The what-ifs still haunt me occasionally, but mostly I feel grateful. Grateful Luna survived, grateful I had the resources to fight back, grateful for the community that formed from shared tragedy, and grateful that Lawrence will spend the rest of his life in prison, unable to hurt any more innocent animals. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.